My parents never wanted me, but I eventually left and built a life of my own. I started a small business, and when it became successful, my parents tried to take control of it, demanding my money and even threatening legal action. Growing up, my parents had never been fond of me. They were high school sweethearts who attended the same college and dreamed of traveling the world and experiencing different cultures. All those dreams came to an abrupt halt when my mother found out she was pregnant during her college years. They considered ending the pregnancy, but their families refused to allow it. My mom ended up dropping out of college and moving back in with her parents to escape the gossip and judgment of others. That's how I entered the world, unwanted by my mom but adored by my grandparents. For years, I believed my mom was my older sister, while my grandparents acted as my parents. She hardly spent time with me and treated me with indifference or anger whenever I sought her attention. My father wasn't in the picture at all, and I didn't even know he existed for much of my early life. My grandparents loved me deeply and took care of me, while my mother and father continued their relationship, showing no interest in raising me. As a child, I couldn't comprehend why my parents didn't want me, even though I could sense their rejection. My grandparents, on the other hand, provided all the love and support I needed. They would babysit me, play with me, and make me feel cared for. By the time I was walking and talking, my father, feeling a sense of guilt, began visiting on weekends. I initially thought he was just a friend of my grandparents. When my grandparents revealed that he was actually my father, my world shifted. My mother hated seeing him spend time with me, but my grandparents encouraged it, hoping he would step up. Eventually, my father got a job and proposed to my mother. They moved in together and reluctantly agreed to take me in when I was 5. Life with them was miserable. My mother constantly reminded me that I should feel grateful for living with them, even though it felt like my life had gone from light to darkness. My father worked long hours and had little patience for me. He'd come home late, telling me he needed alone time if I tried to talk to him. I went from being cared for by my loving grandparents to living with parents who saw me as a burden. My mom never bought me toys or treats, and sometimes I went to school with incomplete homework. When my teacher called her, she would lash out at me instead of helping me. I started doing all my assignments perfectly, hoping to win her approval, but it never worked. My father remained distant, absorbed in his own life. As I grew older, I realized how my parents' treatment of me differed from the way other kids were treated. I'd watch classmates' parents hug, smile, and cheer for them at school, while my parents acted as if I didn't exist. It made me question if I was really their child. My grandparents reassured me that I was, but they explained that my parents just weren't ready to be parents. My mother never missed an opportunity to make me feel bad about myself. She insulted my appearance and even once said, "If I'd gone to school with you, I would have bullied you too." Her words hurt more than anything else. She also refused to believe I was allergic to milk, accusing me of faking it. One day, she forced me to drink milk, leading to a severe reaction that landed me in the hospital. After that incident, my parents' behavior softened. My mom started helping me get ready for school, and my dad began spending occasional evenings with me. For the first time, I felt like they were trying to care, but the damage was already done. For a brief period, life with my parents improved. My mom began asking about my school life, and my dad even invited me to watch football games with him. Although it felt strange at first, I cherished these moments, as they were the closest I'd come to having a real family. We even went to the beach on weekends a few times, and for the first time in my life, I felt a hint of normalcy. When I turned 15, my grandmother reignited a skill she'd taught me years before: crocheting. My grandfather had passed away by then, and my grandmother would create beautiful crocheted items to sell at a local craft fair each year. Her intricate designs and vibrant color choices captivated me, and I quickly became obsessed with learning everything she knew. As I practiced and improved, my love for crochet blossomed into a deep passion. Inspired by my grandmother's entrepreneurial spirit, I decided to try selling my creations at the same craft fair where she showcased her work. The response was incredible. People loved my designs, and I soon realized that this hobby could also help me earn money for my future. Word about my work spread, and I began taking custom orders from friends, classmates, and even strangers in the community. Over time, my skills improved, and I began crafting more elaborate designs, everything from scarves and blankets to unique home decor. My customers appreciated the personal touch in each piece, and their positive feedback motivated me to keep creating. As my earnings grew, my grandmother encouraged me to open a savings account to manage my finances responsibly. She suggested I save the money for college, which I agreed was a great idea. But when my parents learned how much I was making, their reaction was anything but supportive. They were shocked that what they dismissed as a silly hobby had become a legitimate source of income. My dad threatened to destroy all my work, claiming he didn't work hard just so I could waste time on crochet. My mom forbade me from visiting my grandmother, accusing her of turning me against them. They demanded that I hand over the money I'd earned, but I'd already entrusted it to my grandmother for safekeeping. When they called her, yelling and demanding the money, she firmly refused. This conflict showed me that my parents hadn't changed at all. They were still selfish and controlling, willing to undermine my efforts for their own gain. Despite their interference, I refused to give up crocheting. I devised a plan to keep my business running without their knowledge. I told them I was spending weekends at my best friend's house, but in reality, I was going to my grandmother's place to work on my designs. My best friend knew the truth and fully supported me. My grandmother and I worked tirelessly to fulfill the increasing number of orders. Meanwhile, I began expanding my reach using social media platforms like Instagram and TikTok. Sharing my work online connected me to a broader audience and even other artisans, which helped my business grow rapidly. Over time, my small booth at the craft fair transformed into a thriving online business. My grandmother helped me open a joint bank account to save my earnings for college. I trusted her completely, knowing she had my best interests at heart. But my mother eventually found out about my online business after snooping through my phone. When she confronted me, it escalated into a massive argument. My parents accused me of being deceitful, demanded that I give them all the money I'd saved, and even threatened legal action. My mom stood over me, forcing me to delete my Instagram account. I complied, but only deactivated it temporarily, planning to reactivate it once I escaped their control. After this, my parents implemented stricter rules. They tracked my phone, monitored my internet history, and restricted my movements. They even controlled when I could leave the house and how often I could see my friends. Occasionally, they allowed me to visit my grandmother, but they strictly banned me from crocheting with her. It was exhausting, but I held on to my dream of going to college as my ticket to freedom. I kept my head down, focused on excelling in school, and saved every penny I earned from my part-time cafe job, giving my parents the 25% they demanded and secretly saving the rest with my grandmother. The night before my 17th birthday, I packed all my belongings, only items I'd purchased myself, leaving behind anything my parents had given me. I wiped my phone to erase any information they could use to track me. Early the next morning, my grandmother came to pick me up, and I moved in with her. When my parents saw me leaving with my grandmother, they were furious. They started arguing with her and even threatened to call the police. I calmly told them to go ahead, reminding them that at 17, I had the legal right to make my own decisions. Their threats shifted to emotional manipulation. They claimed they would tell everyone I was an ungrateful child and ensure I was ostracized for abandoning them. I stood my ground, telling them I didn't care what they said about me. They also tried to intimidate me by saying they wouldn't support me in college, but I knew I had enough savings and a scholarship to make it on my own. As I walked out of the house, I felt an overwhelming mix of fear, freedom, and determination. It was a moment I had been preparing for, but it still felt surreal. The first few weeks at my grandmother's house were like a breath of fresh air. The oppressive rules and constant surveillance were gone, and for the first time, I felt truly at peace. One of the first things I did was buy a new phone with a fresh number, ensuring my parents couldn't contact me or track me. Next, I went to the bank with my grandmother to convert my joint account into an individual account. Holding my own bank card in my hands for the first time was liberating. I reactivated my Instagram page and resumed running my crochet business. My grandmother, as always, was incredibly supportive, even offering me a dedicated space in her house to set up a small studio. Just a week after I moved out, I heard from neighbors and relatives that my parents had thrown a party. They were celebrating their newfound freedom, calling it the start of their real life, now that they no longer had to deal with me. Photos of them laughing and drinking circulated on social media, and while I tried to brush it off, the news stung. The fact that my own parents were rejoicing over my absence just days after I left confirmed how little I had ever meant to them. It hurt, but it also strengthened my resolve to never go back. My dad's parents, who had been traveling in their RV for years, heard about the situation through family and were horrified. They contacted me to find out what had happened. When I shared my story, they were deeply apologetic for not being there for me and for believing my parents had changed. They also reached out to my grandmother, who filled them in on the many fights she had with my parents over how they treated me. My grandparents took it upon themselves to tell other family members about what I had endured, and word quickly spread through our extended family. To my surprise, many relatives and family friends began reaching out to offer their support. Some even offered financial help, but I politely declined, explaining that my crochet business was thriving and that they could help by spreading the word about it instead. Their kindness helped me realize that even though my parents had failed me, I still had people in my corner who cared. During this time, I received the news I had been waiting for. I was accepted into my dream college with a full scholarship. The campus was close enough that I could visit my grandmother on weekends, which was a relief since I didn't want to be too far from her. My dad's parents even gifted me their old car, which, while in need of some repairs, made it much easier to commute. One of my friends, a writer for a local newspaper, asked if she could interview me about my business. She thought my story might inspire other young people to pursue their passions. After some hesitation, I agreed, hoping it might encourage someone in a similar situation to find hope and freedom. Seeing my story in the paper was surreal. It felt like a small but significant victory after everything I had been through. My grandmother was so proud, and the positive feedback I received from friends and relatives was heartwarming. Of course, my parents saw the article too. They called my grandmother furious, accusing me of painting them as villains. They demanded that I publicly credit them for my success and share my profits with them. They even threatened legal action, claiming they had raised me and were entitled to my earnings. My grandmother stood her ground, telling them that my business had been built under her roof and with her support. She dared them to take it to court, knowing they wouldn't have a leg to stand on. I was furious at how entitled my parents were acting. They had no part in building my business, yet they demanded credit and money. Instead of engaging with their drama, I focused on celebrating my success with the people who truly supported me. I organized a small party with close friends and family to mark this milestone and to thank those who had stood by me through it all. The celebration was everything I needed. It was filled with warmth, laughter, and genuine love. For once, I felt like I was surrounded by people who truly cared about me. Of course, word of the party got back to my parents. Somehow, they managed to get hold of my new number and started sending me a barrage of angry texts. My dad called me ungrateful, accusing me of squandering money on celebrations while refusing to acknowledge all he had sacrificed for me. My mom chimed in, saying they wished they had never had me. Their words stung, but they also reinforced that cutting ties with them had been the right choice. Despite their attempts to guilt me, I stood firm. I knew that this was my life now, and I had no room for their toxicity. Update 1: When I initially shared my story on Reddit, I didn't expect it to gain so much attention. The overwhelming support I've received has been both comforting and empowering, but I admit I'm also nervous. Seeing my story discussed on platforms like TikTok makes me worry that my parents might stumble upon it. Many of you have suggested that I block my parents completely, and I've decided to take that step. However, before doing so, I wanted to send them one final message to express everything I've held back over the years. I don't expect an apology or even a response, I just wanted them to know the impact of their actions. Here's the email I wrote, with my grandmother's help. Dear Mom and Dad, I've spent a lot of time reflecting on our relationship, and it's with a heavy heart that I've decided to cut ties with you both. For my own mental and emotional well-being, I need to move forward without the weight of our toxic past holding me back. Throughout my life, I've tried to earn your love and acceptance, but I've come to realize that I was never enough in your eyes. From the earliest days, your actions made it clear how unwanted I was. Whether it was forcing me to drink milk despite my allergy, mocking my appearance, or treating me like a burden, the pain you caused shaped my childhood. When I found something I was passionate about, crocheting, I hoped it might bring us closer. Instead, your efforts to undermine and control me only reinforced the toxic nature of our relationship. Demanding my hard-earned money, threatening me, and trying to take credit for my success were the final straws. This decision to cut contact isn't an act of revenge. It's an act of self-preservation. I'm choosing to surround myself with love and positivity, and I cannot find that in you. Thank you for inadvertently teaching me resilience. I hope you find happiness in your lives, but it will no longer include me. I ask that you respect my decision and refrain from contacting me. Sincerely, your daughter. Sending this email was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Despite everything, it's incredibly difficult to sever ties with your parents. Society conditions us to love and forgive them no matter what, but I've come to understand that not all parents are deserving of that love. After sending the email, I blocked them on every platform and changed my contact information where necessary. In a few days, I'll be heading to college, and I'm both nervous and excited. My grandma and my dad's parents are helping me move into my dorm, and I'm ready to start this new chapter of my life. As for my business, it's thriving. I've decided to continue crocheting alongside my studies. It's my passion, and I'm determined to balance both. Update 2. It's been 6 months since my last update, and my life has taken such a positive turn that I can hardly believe how far I've come. College has been both challenging and rewarding. The coursework is demanding, but I'm managing to maintain good grades. I've also made some amazing friends who have introduced me to new experiences and even helped bring in more crochet orders for my business. For the first time, I feel like I belong somewhere, surrounded by people who genuinely care about me. On a personal note, I've started dating a wonderful guy named Kyle. We've been together for 2 months now, and he's incredibly kind and supportive. We're still getting to know each other, but so far, everything feels right. Every weekend, I make it a priority to visit my grandma. We still work together to fulfill orders, and the business is thriving more than ever. Her support has been a constant source of strength for me, and I'm so grateful for the bond we share. As for my parents, they haven't reached out since I sent them the email 6 months ago. My grandparents told me that my parents faced intense criticism from family and friends after my story became widely known. Apparently, they sold their house and moved abroad to start fresh. I don't know where they are, and to be honest, I don't really care. Their decision to leave without attempting to reconcile or apologize speaks volumes. I've made peace with the fact that I may never hear from them again, and I genuinely hope they find whatever happiness they're looking for. Meanwhile, my business continues to grow. With the help of social media, I've been able to connect with clients all over the country and even internationally. It's incredible to see how far a passion I started as a child has taken me. Recently, a friend from college who works with the student newspaper wrote an article about my journey as a young entrepreneur. It was a small feature, but it felt like another milestone in my journey. Seeing my story published gave me a sense of pride I hadn't felt before. My grandma cried tears of joy when she read the article, and my relatives and friends showered me with kind messages. I even received more orders after the story was shared. For the first time, I feel like all my hard work is paying off. I've also learned to surround myself with people who uplift me. Thanks to my grandma, my friends, and my supportive community, I've realized that family isn't always about blood, it's about love, respect, and mutual support. This will likely be my last update. I'm focusing on my studies, my business, and building a bright future. Thank you to everyone who has followed my journey and offered kind words along the way. Your encouragement has meant the world to me. If there's one lesson I've learned, it's that you are not defined by the people who hurt you, but by how you rise above them, Thank you for watching the video. Subscribe and turn on notifications to be the first to have Radish and real stories with you. Have a great day.